Welcome back to the channel. I imagine many of you thought I was going to torture Doc this week, making him review Astonishing Iceman #1 with yours truly, and I'm cruel, but I'm not that cruel. This week, I'm not going to let Doc have to review this. I'm going to do it solo. I'm going to take all the burden on myself, not only for Doc, but for you as well, because none of you wanted to read this comic book, but I imagine some of you were curious at what Steve Orlando was going to do with the all-new, all-gay Iceman Bobby Drake character. And it's basically what you would expect from Marvel Comics in 2023. It's mostly kind of an LGBTQ love story with a little bit of superheroics thrown in there just because I guess he felt obligated to put that in there. It's all the slice of life stuff overtaking the actual plot, which actually kind of has a little bit of promise. I'll talk to you about that. It's taking a character that was fully established, changing him, and then when that change fails and everyone basically just says, nah, I don't like this version of Iceman Bobby Drake. None of this makes sense. You don't pivot. You don't recognize that you made a mistake and see how you can rectify the situation. You go full bore right into that iceberg. In fact, you throttle up and see if you can hit it as fast as you can, even though everything's falling apart, because it was never Marvel's fault. It wasn't Cena Grace's fault. It was the fans' fault. We're to blame for not accepting this new version of Iceman, and after this comic book, it might sell better than Cena Grace's Iceman, but this will not sell well at all, especially after the very first issue. And we do get some Steve Orlando creepiness in there. Is it as creepy as Somnus, Steve Orlando's self-insert character, sleep-raping other male characters in the X-Men universe? There's only one way to find out. Let's get into this comic book and some of the things that are going on here. The first thing this thing needs to establish is, how the hell is Iceman even here? He was actually murdered, killed by Nimrod in the Hellfire Gala. In fact, that was one of the big moments. That was supposed to be one of the big impactful things that happened during Hellfire Gala, was the murdering of an Omega-level mutant Iceman himself at the Hellfire Gala. How could he actually be here if Nimrod injected him with nano-whatevers and boiled him to death? Well, the answer is it's a little bit disturbing. I talked about creepy Steve Orlando stepping in here, and this is definitely part of that. So what happened was Romeo, Iceman's boyfriend, upon learning that Iceman died in the Hellfire Gala, went to the Fortress of Solitude, which is apparently Iceman's favorite hangout within the Marvel Comics universe nowadays, and using his power of empathy and how much he loved Bobby Drake Iceman, actually constructed an all-new Iceman. This isn't the Iceman that was murdered. This isn't a clone of that Iceman because there are no resurrections anymore. This is an Iceman that is created purely, I guess, out of the mind and emotional percolations of Romeo himself. And basically, as far as I can tell, he is like a frozen sex doll that can go out there and do superheroics. That is the way that I have taken the resurrection of Bobby Drake Iceman in this comic book. And I don't know, is that creepier than Sleep Raper Somnus, basically going into men's minds when they sleep, make them feel like they've lived out 1,000 years while you bone them to death? Or is it creepier where a guy just reconstructs somebody out of whole cloth because he wants to have some more sex with it? The more I think about this, the worse it gets. But that is the big reveal in here. 1 week after the Hellfire Gala goes down and there's apparently no mutant resurrection, they found a way to resurrect a mutant. The power of love or lust, depending on how you want to look at it. And as I said in the intro, there is a potential story here that's somewhat interesting because Orcus are out there and they have destroyed the island of Krakoa. The mutants are on the run. They might be all wiped out. We're not really sure. And they have created these robots, and it sounds like maybe your cell phone or maybe a tablet or any type of non-organic device can just turn into one of these robots, which feels like a plot point a little bit too far, but whatever. And they are all seeking out mutants, the X gene itself, which is not, absolutely is not, a new plot device. Obviously, we've seen the Sentinels within the X-Men comics for a very, very long time, but there's a little bit of a wrinkle thrown in here, which I'm a little confused by. Apparently, there's a drug out there called Experience, because anything associated with the X-Men needs to be an X-pun, and apparently, men in the gay community are taking Experience to have a little bit more fun when they're having sex, so these robots are hunting down gay men that were using Experience because it didn't leave their system and they can still detect it in them. Of course, I thought like the mutant drug was called Kick or MGH. It's MGH, I think is what it was. So this drug already existed, but it was for people to like level up and become mutants for a short amount of time Now it's being used as like an aphrodisiac or some type of sexual intercourse enhancement type drug or something like that. And there is some interesting possibility in here where you have Orcus, they create these robots and people that have taken kick or MGH. And obviously they're not mutants, but these things are hunting them down, and the X-Men have to go out there and save all these people that really haven't done anything wrong. And it really demonstrates how evil Orcus is. And there's an actual comic book story to this, but it got Steve Orlando and got kind of put on the back burner. And then, of course, now it's like a sexual amusement drug or something like that. So there was a story to tell here. Unfortunately, this only lasts for all of like 2 or 3 pages. Mostly it's other stuff. And this man that Iceman was interrogating, of course, once he saves everybody, he's got to like make out with him in front of everybody, even though he's already professed that the reason that he came back is the power of love, because Romeo loved him so much, he just created him out of pure empathy. But apparently they still have an open relationship. It's really weird stuff. I don't even know what the fuck Steve Orlando is trying to get at it with this, because he's not really a human being anymore. He's basically a frozen sex robot that does some superheroics on the side, being controlled by Romeo. At least that's the way I took it. He even calls him king. He talks about, you've got your throne and you're the one controlling all this, and I wouldn't even be alive without you. I owe everything to you. But once I get out there and save somebody, I'm just going to make out with random dudes that are being chased down because they used experience as some type of aphrodisiac or Spanish fly, or I don't even know what the kids are using these days to make the sex more fun. I don't know. It's really, really strange. And like I said, there's all these robots, and they're out there and they're chasing all these people down, and they're trying to murder them. I mean, they're almost killing people left and right. And when Iceman shows up, he's not even really a hero. He like shows up and decides to try and be funny while people are being murdered right in front of him. Got it in one. So Death Machine in the streets, terror from the sky. The lady says, funny hero, this crap just raining down, and it's turning our things into killer things, talking about, I believe it's taking their devices and making them into robots. And then another guy says, one mutant here is bad enough. Now we've got 2. Are you trying to get us killed? Because obviously more mutants in the area are going to bring in more of these robots. And then the lady says, muties are the only reason we're in trouble. You'll just make things worse, which is actually true. He's probably brought in more damage to them. But these robots are actually, while this moment is happening, as you can see, they're still mowing people down. They're still murdering them because they took the mutant aphrodisiac experience drug, and innocent people are dying, you know, literally by the dozens as this is happening. And he doesn't do anything because he needs to be funny. This isn't heroic. You do your big one-liner. When you show up, you save the day, and then you say something ironic. Or maybe the villain thinks he's won everything, and then he shows up and then he says a one-liner and you kind of get a little laugh at it. And it's a little bit of showmanship. But you don't normally see the hero arriving while people are dying by the dozens and not try to help anybody, but try to get some one-liners in because Steve Orlando thinks he's funny. And maybe he is funny. Maybe I'm just not getting it. Maybe you guys understand the absolute hilarious nature of Steve Orlando and his version of Iceman, which is basically just Cena Grace as Iceman, but dialed up a little bit with some creepiness, you know, with the frozen sex doll aspect of it that obviously Steve Orlando has introduced into this comic book story. And that's kind of what the comic book is. It almost feels like Romeo is supposed to be being elevated, almost like Bernard and Tim Drake Robin, like Jay Nakamura, Superman, son of Kal-El, to where he's a real hero behind Iceman. But once he explains what he's done and the way that Iceman treats him, once again, the real hero of the story comes off as the real villain of the story and somebody that Iceman shouldn't be even near. And is this even Iceman? It's not really Iceman. It's just, I guess, Romeo's interpretation of who Iceman is and the thing that he fell in love with that he reconstructed with love's true kiss or whatever. Really, really weird stuff going on here. And I didn't think Steve Orlando could out Steve Orlando himself. When you think about what Somnus was doing, or probably still is doing, is he still even writing that comic book? Probably, with the sleep raper aspect of this. But now that we have Frozen Iceman sex doll, I think he's outdone himself. And this is comic books at DC and Marvel in 2023. If you want to read real good superhero comic books, you kind of have to go to the indie scene. And there's some really good stuff going on there. Certainly, I would think about an Erratic. I would think about Rogue Sun and several other titles there. All the stuff that Mark Miller's doing obviously with this Miller World stuff at Image Comics. And then you got to go over to manga to really get good superheroics. There just isn't anything going on here. And almost all the time, even if it's not like an LGBTQ slice of life coming of age story overshadowing the superheroics of the story, most of these writers aren't even telling superhero stories. They're telling the story that they want to, because they're not superhero writers for the most part. And DC and Marvel aren't hiring superhero writers. They're going out there and hiring weird niche writers that won Eisners because they made a book that no one liked or bought, but the critics really liked it. And they're putting them on superhero titles, and we're not getting superhero stories for the most part anymore. We are getting some, obviously, over at DC. They're having a few really strong titles, but those are complete outliers. Like Moon Knight at Marvel is the biggest outlier of them all, because everything else that Marvel is putting out for the most part right now is absolute garbage, unless it's being written by actual good comic book writers that they won't give ongoing titles to, but are writing series that are set in continuity 30 years ago. This is kind of what I expected, but it's worse because the creep factor went so far through the roof on this one. Can you believe it? Like, what was your interpretation of this comic book? If you liked it, you're the person I want to hear from. Tell me why this was a good comic book. Tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me where this was an actual superhero story and it wasn't a Bobby Drake LGBTQ romance story with a little superheroics sprinkled in there just because Steve Orlando felt that he needed to, because it is an X-Men comic. He should actually do something before he starts making out with multiple dudes over and over again. I don't know, man. I mean, the character's already done. They've already killed him. Of course, they're making it worse. You know, I did subject Doc to this not that long ago, a couple of years back. I thought they really took it to a new low with the creep factor with Iceman, and now they've kind of outdone themselves, but this has kind of been the trajectory of the character for quite some time now. If you haven't seen this video, definitely check it out right here, or there's also a link in the video description.